Imagine waking up tomorrow with no job, no money, no boss, no concept of Monday, no alarm, no inbox, no meetings. What would you actually do with your time? If your instinct is, I'd finally feel free, congratulations. You just had the same thought nearly every human being had for roughly 300,000 years. For most of our history, that wasn't a fantasy. That was just a regular day. They didn't even have the idea of a day off, because they didn't have the idea of work the way we do either. So here's the real question. What did ancient humans actually do hour by hour from sunrise to sunset? No job to commute to? No screen to scroll? Nothing to binge watch? The answer turns out to be surprising. And honestly, a little uncomfortable for us. Because the people we spent centuries calling primitive were, in several genuinely important ways, living better than most of us are right now. The biggest myth about prehistoric life is that it was basically non-stop survival horror. Wake up, avoid getting eaten, hunt something, die at 30. That picture is almost entirely wrong. And the reason we believed it for so long is oddly simple. We looked at the hard evidence, cut-marked bones, weapons, butchered animal remains, and assumed constant brutal struggle. But we also found cave paintings. We found musical instruments carved from bird bone dating back 40,000 years. We found jewelry made from shells and teeth. We found evidence of people walking hundreds of miles with no roads or maps, purely to trade pigment for body paint. We found graves of elderly disabled individuals who had clearly been cared for, sometimes buried with flowers. That's not the behavior of a species in constant panic. That's the behavior of a species with time on its hands, and using it in genuinely interesting ways. In the 1960s, anthropologist Marshall Sahlins did something fairly radical for the time. He actually studied modern hunter-gatherer groups and measured how they spent their time. He looked at the Kungsan of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, and Aboriginal groups in Australia, communities that had preserved something close to the ancient hunter-gatherer lifestyle. What he found upended the dominant narrative almost completely. On average, these groups spent somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day on what you'd call subsistence work: hunting, gathering, tool maintenance, shelter upkeep. The rest of the day was genuinely, legitimately free. Resting, talking, playing, making music, making tools they didn't urgently need, telling stories. Sahlins famously called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society, not because they owned much, but because they had the one resource every modern person is chasing and rarely catching: abundant, unscheduled free time. Now compare that to the average person today. Between the job, the commute, the errands, the childcare, and the general exhausting overhead of modern life, most adults get somewhere around 2.5 to 3 hours of genuine leisure a day, if they're lucky. And most of that time goes to a screen, watching content specifically engineered to keep them anxious enough to keep scrolling. We are working longer hours under more stress, with less actual rest, than people who hunted animals with sharpened sticks. Sit with that for a second. Let's go deeper, because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Ancient humans talked, constantly and with real skill. If you could travel back and watch a group sitting around a fire in the late afternoon, the most striking thing wouldn't be the fire or the tools, or the absence of Wi-Fi. It would be the conversation. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups consistently show that a huge portion of their non-work time, potentially 60 to 70% of all social time, was spent simply talking. Not just practical talk about migration patterns or river routes. They gossiped, they joked, they argued, they flirted. They told old stories and speculated about things they couldn't explain. British anthropologist Robin Dunbar, known for Dunbar's number, the idea that humans can comfortably maintain around 150 stable relationships before the cognitive load becomes unmanageable, argued that language itself likely evolved primarily as a form of social bonding. Other primates maintain bonds through physical grooming, picking through each other's fur. It's intimate, but it doesn't scale. You can only groom one individual at a time. As human groups grew larger and more complex, physical grooming simply couldn't keep up. So language evolved to do the same social job, but at scale. You can verbally connect with 5 people at once around a fire, maintaining 5 relationships in the time it once took to maintain one. In this framework, gossip isn't a character flaw. It's the original social technology, the basic software of human community. Which means every time you call a friend just to talk about nothing, or gossip with a coworker, or spend an evening laughing with people you love, you're doing exactly what your ancestors did around a fire 50,000 years ago. You're not wasting time. You're performing one of the oldest, most essential human behaviors there is. Here's something that genuinely surprises people. Sleeping in one consolidated 8-hour block is almost certainly a modern invention. Not something we evolved to do, and not even something humans historically did. Historian Roger E. Kirch spent over 2 decades combing through diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature, and found overwhelming evidence that before artificial lighting became widespread, most people slept in 2 distinct phases. For sleep, from roughly dusk until around midnight, then a period of natural wakefulness, not insomnia, lasting an hour or 2. Then second sleep, until dawn. During that middle waking period, people didn't lie there anxiously wishing for sleep. They got up, talked with family, prayed, had sex, visited neighbors, checked on animals. Some used the time deliberately for reflection, writing, or problem solving. Historical texts casually reference first sleep and second sleep, as if no explanation were needed, because none was. Everyone experienced it. It was only after gaslighting, and later electric lighting, made the night fully conquerable, that this natural rhythm got compressed into the single 8-hour block we now consider normal. If you've ever woken at 2 a.m. feeling strangely alert, the answer might be, nothing's wrong. Your body is just doing what human bodies did for hundreds of thousands of years. One of the most persistent myths about prehistoric humans is that their technology was crude. It wasn't. Take stone napping, shaping flint or obsidian through precise, controlled strikes to produce a sharp, consistent blade. It sounds simple. It isn't. The material has specific fracture properties that must be understood and anticipated. One wrong strike shatters the whole piece. Modern practitioners who've tried to learn it report that genuine skill takes years of practice. Clothing production was similarly demanding. Scraping hides clean, treating them to prevent decay, then stitching garments together using bone needles with eyes carefully drilled through tiny bone fragments using stone tools. Because the stitching mattered to them. Because they cared. And then there's the art. The cave paintings at Lascaux, France, were made roughly 17,000 years ago. The ones at Chauvet are potentially 36,000 years old. These aren't crude scribbles. They're sophisticated, dynamic depictions of galloping horses, turning bison, charging rhinoceroses. Some artists used the natural curves of cave walls to give animals a 3-dimensional quality, so that by flickering firelight, the figures appeared to move. That's not primitive. That's genuinely breathtaking artistic ambition, created in the dark for no practical reason at all, except that someone had something to say. They played, seriously and enthusiastically. Play isn't a modern luxury. It's one of the defining behaviors of intelligent social species. Crows play, dolphins play, wolves play, and humans play constantly and elaborately. We have evidence of board games stretching back to the earliest civilizations. The royal game of found in ancient Mesopotamia, dates to around 2500 BCE. But organized play almost certainly predates any civilization. Children in every hunter-gatherer society ever studied engage in rich, complex play, mimicking adult skills, inventing rules, competing, cooperating. Wrestling matches, foot races, throwing contests appear independently across cultures with no contact with each other, which strongly suggests competitive play is simply something humans naturally do when they have time and energy. And the line between play and education in ancient societies barely existed. You learned to hunt by playing at hunting, learned negotiation through games with real stakes. They also took extraordinary care of each other in D&D, the detail that hits hardest and gets the least attention. We've found skeletons of people with severe lifelong disabilities who nonetheless survived for years, even decades. A Neanderthal found at Shanidar Cave, known as Shanidar I, had a withered, amputated arm, was partially blind, had significant hearing loss, and had survived serious leg injuries, yet lived to around 40, genuinely old for the time. He couldn't have hunted or gathered effectively. His group fed him and protected him anyway, for years, not because they had to, but because they chose to. We've found a child with Down syndrome who lived in what's now Spain, roughly 500,000 years ago, surviving to around age 8, a level of sustained care that goes far beyond basic survival instinct. We've found healed fractures, meaning someone brought food and tended the fire while the person recovered. These bones don't tell a story of indifference. They tell a story of communities investing real resources in each other for no strategic reason, except that this is simply what it means to be human. And yes, they hunted, and it was genuinely extraordinary. Before bow and arrow technology, which appears roughly 70,000 years ago in South Africa, humans hunted primarily through persistence hunting, tracking a large animal not by sprinting, but by simply maintaining a steady pace through the hottest part of the day for hours until the animal overheats and collapses. This works because humans cool primarily through sweating rather than panting, letting us sustain movement in heat that would incapacitate almost anything else. Our enlarged glutes, flat feet, long legs, and stable heads are all running adaptations. We were quite literally built to be endurance predators. And then there was genuine rest. Neuroscience has identified the default mode network, brain regions that activate specifically during unfocused, inwardly directed attention, linked to daydreaming, self-reflection, and creative thought. It requires real cognitive stillness to activate, something modern life, filled with constant input, rarely allows. Ancient humans sat by fires after dark, watching flames, letting thoughts wander with no agenda. The default evening activity for most of human history. That stillness likely fueled enormous creative and philosophical leaps. Minds with genuine time to wander produced the earliest stories about the stars, the dead, and the shape of the world, the ancestors of science, philosophy, and art itself.